the last time we met, we were very deep in Talmudic stories, in rabbinic literature and rabbinic narratives. And I want to go back to that. That was fantastic learning, and it brought up so many issues. But I also had I think I want to go back. I felt the need to go back to Tanakh as well. And in particular, to revisit some biblical stories, some stories from Tanakh that, maybe don't get enough attention. I see a seahorse. Hi, Lauren. How are you? Okay. I just have to take a moment to say that Frida Benin Sutton's, whatever it's called, the picture that she has is of her, the subject of her PhD thesis, seahorses. Mother, I think, parenting among genders in seahorses. So
figure out how the males get pregnant to transfer that over to the humans.
Okay, there you go. Well, today, that's actually, believe it or not, kind of apropos because we're going to be thinking a little bit of gender bending in Tanakh, in symbolic, in metaphors in Tanakh about God. So the narrative, the text, the book that I want to go to is a book that really, it isn't studied enough. It's hard, it's complicated, Hosea. But on the other hand, it's very present in Jewish life. In other words, there are books in Tanakh that maybe didn't, that, are obscure, and we don't know about, they're not familiar to us, we don't hear about them because they're actually not referenced often. Hosea actually is referenced, and one measure of that I like to use is haftarot, right? There are a number of moments in the cycle of the Jewish year when the rabbis chose Hosea as a haftarah. One of them is extremely important, Shabbat Shuvah. The chapters that we're going to be reading first are the haftarah for Sefer Bimidbar, and it has very interesting connections. Also, there are pesukim as we read Hosea. You will recognize pesukim. There are pesukim in Hosea that are very that the rabbis refer to a lot as very, very core phrases, core proof texts for Jewish life, for halakha, for all sorts of issues in Jewish life. So we'll recognize some of them. I'll show you some of those. So on one hand, it's not studied enough, and I can tell you myself, I've never taught Hosea. In all of my years of teaching Tanakh, I only taught Hosea a couple of times, and I've taught Trei Asar, I've taught Amos. I've never taught Hosea. In fact, the only time I taught Hosea was early in the years that I was teaching Tanakh in Hillel High School. And that was because we were, for the honors Tanakh classes, we were following the Chidon, the international and national Chidon HaTanakh curriculum, but we didn't study the whole book of Hosea. The Chidon people excerpted, told us, which chapters and which pesukim to read, and they for good reason, I think, they never assigned the first 3 chapters, which are the ones that I'm going to start with you today, because they are kind of, there's a bizarreness to them. They're very complicated. The Chidon HaTanakh asks kids to just study the Pshat, which is a fantastic thing, but it's hard to do these first 3 chapters only in the Pshat. And you'll understand that better as we go. So Usually, I would start to teach a book in Tanakh with what? What do I always start with? A historic context. But I'm actually going to put a halt on that. I'm going to back off for this series. I think next week we can do that. because I want to get right into the text. I want to show you what we're in for, show you what we're diving into. And then the historical context is very important. And you'll see even today that Hosea references historical events in his very first Nevuah. And we're going to have to look at what those historical events are in Sefer Melachim. But for now, I really want to get into the, I want to call it the essence of Hosea. And I'm going to do that actually by sharing my screen right now. We're going to dive right into Perek Aleph. Okay, somehow the fundraising page for Hosea is always the first thing that comes up. Okay, but I want Sefaria. Okay, can you all see my is the chat open? Is your chat open? Is the chat open for you? Hi, Linda.
I can see the page, Emily.
You can all see the page, but I'm wondering about the chat function. I'm not seeing it.
If you can hear me, oh, I see.
Yeah, the chat's open.
Okay, so I welcome, hi, okay. If you want, in advance of next week's class, I can send you this source sheet because we're going to be using it for a few weeks. So use the chat if you want. I think I'll be able to see chats. If I don't and I don't respond, let me know. Because really, I'm going to read the first chapter of Hosea, and it really invites more demands, reactions, and you'll see what I mean immediately. And I'd like you to, either in the chat or just, jot things down on your own. I want to finish the first chapter, which is short, and maybe the first 3 Pesukim of the second chapter. All right. And the translation here is not perfect, but I've tried to adjust it, and we might continue to adjust it together. Devar Adonai asher haya el Hosea ben Be'eri bimei Uzziah Yotam Achaz Chizkiyahu Malchei Yehuda uvimei Yeravam ben Yoash Melech Yisrael. So this, of course, is an introduction that was added on when at a certain point when the Nevuot of Hosea were compiled and edited into the book that we have today. It's important, and again, I'm going to get back to the details of the history, hopefully next week, but just to always remind you when you see a quick historical thumbnail at the beginning of a book of Navi, this is very meaningful, right? When to a reader of Tanakh, I'm not sure when people first started reading the book of Hosea in the form that it's in, as opposed to hearing it orally. But when the editor says, Bimei Uzziyahu, or Yotam, or Achaz Chizkiyahu, or Ravam ben Yoash, it's like for people in my generation hearing, that was in the Kennedy years, or we might say something, in 20 years, oh, those were the Trump years, or the, whatever. So mentioning the name of the king is more than, it does situate it very specifically, it helps us actually give dates for the career of Hosea as a Navi, but it also evokes a time, it evokes a culture, it evokes a social, political, economic period. And we'll talk more about that next time. Techilat diber Adonai b'Hosea, vayomer Adonai el Hosea, lech, kach lecha eshet zinunim b'yardei zinunim, ki zano tizneh haaretz me'acharei Adonai. So, a couple of quick comments on this. Techilat diber Hashem seems to indicate that this is in the very beginning of Hosea's career. perhaps the first mission that Hosea is sent on, his first, what's it called? His first commission as a prophet, right? Analogous to what do we have in, certainly we have in the life of Moshe, the life of Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, and Yechezkel. We often have a whole chapter or a narrative devoted to what we call the Hakdasha of the Navi, the moment that the Navi was chosen, inaugurated, sent out into the world as a Navi. And it almost feels as if perhaps it's possible to read it this way, that this language of Techilat Diber Hashem b'Hosea almost signifies that this particular prophecy, this mission, this moment is his inauguration as a Navi. And as we go, that makes a lot of sense. That actually, I think when we think of these three chapters in that way, we read them a little bit more profoundly. So God is not telling him, remember, we've spoken about this so many times, but always important to remember, what is the primary job of a Navi? To speak, right? Niv Sfatayim are expressions of the lips. The word Navi in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, means someone who communicates, someone who speaks. And yet, in this chapter, he's not given any words to say, right? God isn't giving him a message that he's supposed to go out and tell the Jewish people. Rather, and you saw this in this pasuk, and I don't know, unmute yourselves and just shout out, right? What is this? What is God telling Hosea to do? How would you characterize it? I'm assuming you're reading the English. If the Hebrew is hard for you, go lech, and I want to emphasize certain words because they should echo for you a bit. Lech, go. As this is your mission. Go take for yourself a wife of whoredom and children of whoredom, for the land is prostituting itself. He's not telling him anything about go out to the Jewish people and tell them this message, as happened with the other Nevi'im who we spoke about, Moshe, Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel. This is a kind of an intimate moment. God is actually diving right into Hosea's personal life. And he's saying, hi, Hosea, you are about to be an Navi, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to get married. And not only do I want you to get married, I want you to take Eshet as a wife, Eshet Zinunim, a woman who, I don't love that translation. Not a woman who was a prostitute once, or was disloyal or adulterous once. This is a woman who seems, this is her profession. She is a woman, she's a prostitute. And have children of prostitution, of whoredom, I guess. And so I want you to do this. And immediately though, or what do you think about that? It's clearly what, right? There's something, right? He's telling the Hosea to do something, and you expect that what? Yell, somebody? That this is really, what's the point of telling him to marry a prostitute? It's a symbolic act. There's some symbolism here, right? There's some symbolism here, whether how it all played out, unclear, but there's symbolism here. And we know that clearly. It's not subtle. The Tanakh doesn't hide this, or doesn't keep it, hidden. We don't have to dig too deep. The pasuk decodes it for us immediately. Why? Because the land is prostituting itself from following the Lord. In other words, who is the land? The people of Israel has been personified by the land, deeply connected, almost identified with the land, has been straying from God, has been, you'll see, worshiping other gods, betraying God, straying from the path of God, like a prostitute, right? Using that language of prostitution. And Hosea complies. Vayelech vayikach et Gomer bat Divlayim. She has a name. Vatahar vateled lo ben. He gets married to a prostitute named Gomer bat Divlayim, and she becomes pregnant, and she bears a son. Vayomer Adonai elav, Kra shemo Yisrael. Ki od ma'at ufakadati et demei Yisrael al Beit Yehu v'ishpati mamlechut Beit Yisrael. God says, okay, now, next, name this child Yisrael. So Yisrael, it's kind of actually, on one hand, a nice name. Emek Yisrael is one of the most lush, beautiful areas in the northern kingdom, the north of Israel, which is where Hosea's career takes place. But why? It's this lovely place, but there's something ominous going on here. Ki od ma'at ufakadati et demei Yisrael al Beit Yehu, because soon I will punish, he says. I think pakadati carries a feeling of remembering, holding accountable. The house of Yehu, who was a king of Israel, I will remember, hold the house, the dynasty of Yehu, responsible for the blood of Yisrael. V'hishpati mamlechut Beit Yisrael, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. Just a quick reminder to everybody. We'll go into a little more detail when we look at the history, but just a quick reminder to everybody. This is in the 8th century BCE. The people of Israel maybe 200 years before, the number right, I'm not sure, but had been split into two kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel in the north, the kingdom of Yehudah in the south. By 722, the Assyrian Empire in the northeast, one of the rising empires northeast of Israel, is going to totally destroy the northern kingdom and come close to destroying the southern kingdom of Yehudah as well. So there's this looming. It's hard to date this prophecy exactly, because as you see, the historical context, the first pasuk, there's a certain vagueness. Yeravam was actually, I think, the longest reigning king, certainly of the northern kingdom. He reigned for approximately 50 years. So depending on what point in his, during his reign, Hosea, this event happened to Hosea, either way, there's a looming threat from the northeast, and God says, and God is speaking to the people of Israel and saying there was blood shed in the valley of Yisrael, and that blood needs to be accounted for, and the house of Yehu, the kingdom of Yehu, and the entire kingdom of Israel is going to be destroyed. So the first child is named for this lovely piece of land, which carries a bloody history and a very ominous prophecy in it. So the name of the child actually becomes a message from God. This is not the first, it's not the only time. Hosea is not the only prophet who names his children almost as an act of prophecy. We'll talk about that a little after. And at that time, when this destruction comes, I will break the bow of kingdom, the kingdom of Israel in Emek Yisrael, in the valley of Israel. So this child named Yisrael goes into his life bearing this, I don't know, name that, maybe it's neutral. It's the name of a place, which also, yes.
Well, it says Dameh, right? Pakazi et Dameh Yisrael. They're being accused of killing the people?
No. So Dameh Yisrael means the blood that was shed in Israel. Just to give you, just so I was, I'll go into it in more detail, but just to give you, a reminder of what that was. Yehu, Yehu is the first in a dynasty that is appointed by Elisha, and there's something ambiguous about this actually. In Sefer Melachim, Yehu's mission is to kill. It's part of a mission of destroying the house of Omri, Achav, Izebel, and so forth, right? So those battles and that bloodshed happened in Israel, right? So it's not a person. Israel is not a person, it's an area. And just looking at the word, just so you know, think about it, Zera El, right? A place, it evokes it's a fertile valley, right? Zera is seed. It's a valley where seeds grow, a fertile valley. Some of the commentaries are going to play on that also, but for now, let's go further. Batar Od, and she becomes pregnant again. Bateled Bat, she has a daughter this time. Vayomer lo, Kra Shema lo Ruchama. Ki lo osif od arachem et Beit Yisrael, ki naso esalahem. Whoa, so this time they have a baby girl, a daughter, and God, presumably God, I don't think that's ambiguous, although some have suggested it. God tells the Navi, Hosea, this child you will call Lo Ruchama. And I know that in the translation here, and I didn't have a chance to change it, there may be a reason. I think this is the older JPS translation. The translation is, for I will no longer accept the house of Israel or pardon them. I'm not sure why accept is there, but all of you will recognize Ruchama is L'rachem, to feel compassion, to feel pity, right? And you can do some comparative look at some of the other translations. I just didn't have a chance to do it, but immediately I think even people, even those of us with a rudimentary Hebrew or familiarity with Tanakh or tefillah or prayer, that Lo Ruchama means I will not have pity. I will not have compassion for her. Ki lo osif od arachem et Beit Yisrael, ki naso esalahem. I will not pardon them. I will carry forward. I will bear their sins. I will, their sins. I will punish them for their sins. Because the word Ruchama is just, it's so emotional. It's really important to say that the son is named, it's Yisrael, it's a name of a place, it evokes a bloody massacre. Lo Ruchama this is a very emotional word, right? And God, Lo Ruchama, it implies, when you say Lo Ruchama, it implies that there's been an inversion. There's been a reversal. It implies that she was my compassion. Ruchama as a name, I happen to love that name actually. It's Ruchama. It's almost like, it isn't in Arabic, someone help me here, Rahma. Do we say that? Have you heard anybody?
There's a boy's name, Rahamim.
Rachamim, but I feel like maybe there's an expression. It's my who I have compassion for. But now, no. Kra shema lo yuchama, ki lo osif od arachem et Beit Yisrael, ki naso esalahem. Ve'et Beit Yehuda, but et Beit Yehuda arachem, voshatem b'Adonai Elohehem, ve'lo oshiem bekeshet u'becherov u'milchama u'besusim u'frashim. And this is like almost, I think it's possible. I think that in the English, in this JPS, there was maybe I'll put it back. There was a parenthesis here in Pasuk Zion, and that may imply that some people think that that was added later, right? As a pro-Yehuda statement. I don't know, I have no idea. It may or may not, it may or may not flow in the text.
It's actually, Emily, it could actually be a negative, something negative about Yehuda, because it's almost like saying Yehuda deserves, they're also sinners, they deserve to be destroyed, but I'm having mercy on them and not destroying them.
Absolutely. Including them in this, absolutely, you're right. It's a very qualified reassurance to Yehuda, absolutely. And just so you know, in the beginning, in Amos's first very spectacular speech about where he goes, al shlosha pishei Damasek, al shlosha pishei Aza, al shlosha, all the different nations surrounding Israel. He also, and then he ends up with al shlosha pishei Israel. He actually has an insert where he talks to Yehuda about Yehuda, al shlosha pishei Yehuda, and commentators are actually puzzled there too. It's sort of, it doesn't feel like perfectly comfortable slipped in there, but I don't know. Now we have another pasuk chet, vatigmol et lo ruchama, she weans lo ruchama, and she gets pregnant again and has a child, a son, vayomer, kra shemo lo ami, ki atem lo ami, va'anochi lo eheya lachem. The son is called not my people. Lo ami, not my people. And again, you feel this sense of reversal. Of course, you were my people, and now you are not my people. And you can see ki atem lo ami, va'anochi lo eheya lachem. What do you expect to hear? Va'anochi lo eheya lachem. Le Elokim, perhaps. We don't hear it. But we can hear it. We don't see it in the text, but we can definitely hear it. And this is the classic formula of the Brit. You will be for me a people, and I will be for you a God. And in this chapter, in this narrative, God harshly reverses it. And I'm sure you can feel a progression, right? The first child is named Yisrael, then Lo Ruchama, but finally, I'm done. You are no longer my people anymore. Okay, I don't know, should I take a few reactions? I was gonna read the first three Pesukim of Pasuk Perek Bet, just to soften things for us a little bit, just to let you in on the fact that there's going to be, there's going to be a redemption, a transformation. We can do it very quickly, just, but I want to react first to the first chapter. So there's a reversal, and a redemption, a transformation, a reversal of the harsh, punitive anger of chapter 1 eventually the Jewish people and Yehuda and Israel will be reunited. Ki gadol yom Yisrael, and finally, imru la'achechem ami, they will say to their brothers that we are God's people. Ula'achotechem ruchama, you will be, I will have mercy. Okay, now I don't want to go into the rest of Perek Bet yet, but I'm warning you, if there's something bizarre about the first chapter where God instructs a Navi to marry a harlot and have children of harlotry, and then, instruct him to name them some very harsh, bizarre names that, it's hard to imagine a child going through life with those names, actually. So, the truth is, the metaphor is continued. It's a little messy, but the metaphor is continued into chapter 2. And at that point, actually, the anger intensifies, and the anger gets quite violent. In other words, in Perek Aleph, just to give you, kind of a foreshadowing, in Perek Aleph, the anger is described, the anger is at the Jewish people. The punishment, right, is going to be at the Jewish people. The punishment will happen to them, right? There'll be an avenging of Demei Yisrael, al Beit Yehu, and the kingdom of Yisrael will be destroyed. In chapter 2, and it's, it's troubling. The Navi stays in the metaphor, right, and describes the anger at the wife who is prostituting herself with other people, committing adultery. And the anger is because he stays in the metaphor, and the anger is at the wife, and it's actually violent anger, almost violent, perhaps fantasies of anger against the wife who is straying from her husband. So it gets rough, and it's for very good reason, I think, that it's not the first, the Chidon Tanakh curriculum did not include these chapters. But can we just react for a minute? Let's talk about this chapter, this little narrative, this conversation between God. It's a conversation between a series of conversations, actually, that happens over time, it seems, between God and Hosea. And it's clearly a metaphor, it's clearly symbolic, but tell me what you think about this. And really, I would really ask everybody to just throw out what you're thinking about this. Because it's bizarre, no? Or tell me what's bizarre, or I have another question. Some of it is, well, if you know other Nevi'im, it may sound familiar a little bit. But just react a little.
Emily, can I ask you a question? I think it's related to this. It makes me feel that, okay, let me start it a different way. How is Hosea viewed by the people? Is he a respected figure?
It's a great question. And actually, he is a prophet. We don't know that. For instance, with Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Amos, for instance, we know he gets into a fight with the Kohen. I don't think we know that about Hosea. And I think that's a very relevant question. What Annie's raising is this question about, well, let me go back a little bit. Give you a framework for thinking about this chapter and all of the books of Nevuah, and this question that and sometimes we know who is the audience for this narrative. Who is the audience? Or I should say, who are the audiences? Who's the first audience for this story? I'm going to tell you what I think. I think the first audience is the Navi himself, the prophet himself. It's Hosea himself. Because the first, he's absorbing this message. And I'm being vague about when I say he's absorbing that message, because we don't know how a Navi absorbs a message, right? You know, there are kind of people who, you know, subscribe to, I call it the CD-ROM. I know CD-ROMs don't exist anymore, but we all probably remember it. You know, the CD-ROM model where God pops a CD into the prophet's CD, the slot, and whatever God puts inside there, the prophet, you know, plays out. There are people who think of prophecy like that. I actually don't think it's like that so much, but I think it's more, you know, that's definitely a topic that we can explore, but just warning you that I'm going to be vague when I say how Hosea absorbed the message, but he is. However he absorbed the message, whether he heard God talking to him, or whether he kind of through his own, you know, religious imagination, imagined a scenario, connected to God by imagining a scenario like that. And there are different ways that scholars and rabbinic commentaries have thought about this, and philosophers, it's a philosophical question, have thought about it. But either way, I see him as the first audience, right? God, there's a message that God wants the Navi to absorb. Okay, so I think, and I think that's very, very important, because it's different from how other prophets absorb God's messages. So like we're reading about Moshe in the parashiyot now, you know, on Shabbat. Moshe is a Navi that seems to, he's the closest you get to that CD-ROM model where God tells him a message and he actually, it sounds like he's supposed to express that message almost verbatim, what God said. But God isn't even giving Hosea a message. And yet we know that Hosea is absorbing this message. Perhaps, how is he absorbing it? Experientially, right? And then, so that's the first audience, Hosea, the prophet himself. And I want to add one more thing to that. And that's where I feel like it almost makes sense to view this as a quasi-hakdasha, as a quasi-inauguration, because God is almost telling him, this is what it means to be a Navi, right? But hold on to that for a while. But who's the second audience? Chronologically, who's the second audience?
It would be
His wife and children, no?
That's, who said that?
Me, Linda.
Hi, Linda. Actually, that's great. I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, let's not forget them. The wife, the poor wife,
Yeah.
and children, correct. Well, let's hold on to that. Lauren, what were you going to say? Who's the next?
Well, I was going to say the people of Israel.
Yes,
But
the people of
the
Israel.
question is, but how is he communicating that message to them in his own
Exactly.
private life?
Right. So he wouldn't be a Navi if he wasn't communicating this to the people of Israel. But we don't know exactly. Did he get up in the middle of the marketplace one day and say, this is what happened to me? God told me to marry this harlot, and I did, and this is what happened. And then God told me to name first child this and the second child this, and this is what it means to all of you, for all of you, right? So it's possible that that's how his first audience, the people of the Northern Kingdom, maybe that's how he communicated that message to them. Or what else? Any other, just play it. It's worth playing out some possibilities, because I think, in terms of so this is Annie's question, right? I just want to bring us back to Annie's question. So we don't know how they responded, right? But I think with a very dramatic, prophetic message like this, dramatic and dramatized, performative message like this, I think it's I think we're entitled to try to imagine how people might have thought of him, right? Any thoughts? It wouldn't be, and by the way, next week, maybe I'll bring you a few other examples of Nevi'im who performed their nevuah, performed symbolic acts to the point of they embodied a nevuah, right? When a Navi performs an act, or when a Navi names his own children a prophecy, or acts out a prophecy like this, it's, that old, I can't remember who was the writer who wrote "The medium is the message," right? So the prophet is the medium and the message, right? The medium, the medium, he is the medium, the what's it called? What's another word for medium? The tool that projects the message and the message itself. So, so how would you imagine the Jewish people? I mean, and maybe that's what prompted your question, Annie. How would you imagine the Jewish people thinking about this?
Well, I'll judge by my own reaction. Okay. I
Yeah.
think he comes off as being really on the fringe.
Yeah.
And kind of weird and kind of out there. And
Yeah.
And if Israel is so great in number at this point, right? Did we just say that they have?
No, the idea, what we said about being great in number would have been when, when there's a reconciliation with God. But we actually do know that Israel is the time period of Yeravam ben Yoash that his career overlaps with is a very prosperous and, affluent time. Yeah.
Which would make his actions seem even more, unbelievable, more.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
Very weird, right.
It's a very weird thing for God to ask a Navi to do. And I think, we're going to look at it. Yeah. I think we're going to look at some of the rabbinic responses to this. The Rambam and others say it's impossible that God could possibly ask a Navi, right? A Navi who's close to God, who should be seen as by the people as close to God. It would be impossible, inconceivable for God to ask him to do something so demeaning, so that would make him such an act of ridicule or, disgrace amongst the people, right? Why would the people want to even listen to somebody like this, right? So, yeah, I think that's a very important issue here. But I will counter by saying he is the first. Chronologically, he's the first of the what we call the classical Nevi'im, the Nevi'im Acharonim that we have records of. But he won't be the last Navi who the people marginalize and who behaves in a way commanded by God in ways that alienate him from the people, that humiliate him before the people, that make him, look truly bizarre, right? None of the Nevi'im win popularity contests, right? It's the institution of a Navi, that's not what it's designed for. It's designed to communicate really difficult truth to the Jewish people in ways that, through methods, through language, through performances that actually are alienating. And that's why we might, my students would always say, so what's the point of this, right? The Nevi'im were failures. And that's, I think that's, well, that might lead us to the next question, actually. Who's the next audience? So we don't know how the Jewish people responded. It's worth imagining it, okay? And of course, we're going to get to this in a minute, really worth asking, in what way was this an effective mode of communication? And hold on to that. But I want to get to the next audience. After the Jewish people in that time, who are the next audiences?
Well, I guess the non-Jewish people, all the,
It's yeah,
it goes in concentric circles, you know,
it
yourself.
does, but I hear what you're saying, definitely, but there's, I'm sorry, somebody want to say something?
Hi, I think the rest of the world.
Who's talking?
Sheba.
Hi, Sheba. So,
Hi.
but you know what? The rest of the world is not going to get this, is not going to access this yet. Who accesses it next?
The future Nevi'im, no?
Okay, that's actually a very good point. There's an oral, we know that there's an oral transmission of these speeches, right? And we know that some of the later Nevi'im are aware of them because, in other words, future generations who hear the oral transmission of these speeches. And we know that because, ouch, I had confusion in my house before I did this, and I need to plug this in. I need to hold on a second, please. Give me 1 second.
Hi, Linda.
Give me 1 second. Actually, give me 1 second. I'm going to run and get my charger from upstairs. But in the meantime, try to figure out who are the next audiences. I'll be right there.
Hi, Yenny.
Hi, Sheba. I'm muting myself because I may have a phone call coming in.
No problem. Good to see you.
Okay. We had confusion. My kids happily came early today instead of later on tonight as I expected. Hold on. Okay. So there was confusion about where I should have this class. Okay. Hello. Are you all here? Yes. Okay. So
We're here.
So the first audience are the people who he actually spoke to. The first audience is the Navi himself. The second audience is the people who heard him firsthand tell the story. I don't want to forget Linda's note that is really worth thinking about. His family, his wife, and his children. Then there's this oral. There are people, you know, these speeches, remember, they were always, you know, there were no newspapers there, right? You can imagine this almost as an op-ed, except not in print. They were, the messages, these speeches were delivered orally, but because this is an oral society, right, a society where things are transmitted orally, they were repeated, right? There was a transmission, and certainly the prophets of the next few generations definitely were aware of them, and we know that, and as I'll show you, because we have Yirmiyahu, and Yechezkel very specifically, and Yeshayahu as well, almost referencing them, right? But then Sheba, did you want to say something? I see your hand. Sheba? Sheba? Okay. Just yell in, Sheba. But eventually, right, the oral transmission was, you know, wasn't going to work. So eventually, the audience for these nivuot became the people who read these nivuot, right? Either in some forms that preceded the canonization of Tanakh, or eventually as part of Tanakh, right? And Hosea became part of Tanakh, and his audience became the readers of Tanakh, and down, through thousands of years to us. We are today, we are the audience of Hosea. We are reading his words. And by the way, that, it's, on one hand, he's very rooted in a historical context, but in other ways, his messaging transcends his historical context.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When he was making his nevuot, was he thinking that he had to have those two separate, now and later?
He certainly couldn't have imagined a world where reading and writing was, dominant, right? I don't think he could have imagined that. The world that we're in now, where I don't even need a book to read Hosea. I pull it up on Sefaria or on Al HaTorah, right? I don't think he could have. Remember, he's 800 years before the coming.
So that's why I'm asking. Like, the fact is that he was really talking, even though you're saying who was his audience, he wasn't talking to that audience.
Well,
it might talk to us.
So Sheba, I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but I do think he had like kind of a dual sensibility of needing to talk to the people who were, his own generation, his contemporaries, his neighbors, about how he understood what was happening in their society. But I think he's the kind of thinker and the kind of, word, speaker who knows that his message can carry,
thank you.
Much further reaching implications. Yeah. And I think all of the Nevi'im, it would be really interesting to look for where we see that, look for the language where we actually see the Navi thinking like that. That's a really nice, project, or, lens through which to read, to see where a Navi, I know there are, I can't think offhand, but where you hear the Navi almost thinking, I know my message is for generations to come as well, right? And I think it may have been the only way they could have sustained themselves, because as I said, they alienated most of their own people, right? They were actually alienating marginalized people often, who, and we know Yirmiyahu talks about this, about his frustration, about his frustration at his total inability to change things. But I want to say something else about, and maybe this is a good way to, end for now. I want to say something else about all the audiences I guess this is the definition of a great classic. And I think Hosea I think he's one of the great classics of human literature, Jewish literature, human literature. But the problem with classics is that over the course of time, different audiences hear and read these words, receive these words in different, in different cultural contexts. And I think and I'm going to tell you when I felt this very acutely, I think in terms of the gender issues, Hosea becomes very problematic. I think the metaphor, and we're going to talk a lot about this next week, I think the metaphor of God and Israel being lovers, being a married couple, becomes profoundly important over the course of Jewish thinking, right? Shir HaShirim, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, Yeshayahu, into rabbinic literature. But on the other hand, it is complicated gender-wise. And my experience, my first like very acute experience of this was, I don't know, many years ago. I wasn't teaching Hosea, but I was teaching Yirmiyahu. And I'll show you I think I have the piece of Yirmiyahu on this, on this source sheet. This is Yirmiyahu Perek Gimel, Pasuk Aleph. We read it as a haftarah. Lemor hein yishalach ish et ishto v'alcha meito v'ayta li'ishacher hayashov yashov eleha od halo hanof techanaf haaretz hahi v'at zanit re'im rabim v'shov elai nu Adonai. So again, it's and Yirmiyahu expands on this. If a man divorces his wife and leaves and marries another man, can he ever go back to her? Would not such a land be defiled? You have prostituted yourself with many lovers. Can you return to me? And I remember teaching these chapters, and this metaphor flows through 2 chapters, the 2nd and 3rd chapter in Yirmiyahu. And I remember teaching these chapters to the young women. And as I'm doing it, I'm sort of seeing their faces and seeing, and all of a sudden, because I was doing it with them, feeling extremely uncomfortable, right? With the notion, with a metaphor where God is the man and the Jewish people sinning are a woman who is adulterous, the word zanit, using the word zonah over and over and over again as a metaphor for the Jewish people, it's painful. It's so complicated. And let's just back up. Over throughout Tanakh, in Sefer, in Tehillim, throughout the Nevi'im, even in Torah, there are many, many different images of God. There are many metaphors for God. God is a father, mostly a father, but we do have God as a mother. There are places in Tanakh where there's an image, the imagery of God is as a mother. So it's mostly male. God is almost always viewed as male, but sometimes female. There are some really interesting and beautiful examples of certainly God as a mother, and God as an eagle, watching over her nest, for instance. So many images of God. But in these metaphors where there's one partner who's committing adultery, one partner who's straying from betraying the other partner, the sinning partner, the betraying partner, is always the wife. And I'm not sure exactly what to do with that, but I feel like, that has to be aired too, that here we have, who knows how women thought. Clearly for the people, I'm going to say, the people who first, Hosea's audience, his initial contemporary audience, I'm sure were not bothered by this, because it was probably, in keeping with the norms of their society. But it was very hard. It's very hard for me. It was hard, and it taught me a lesson. It sensitized me to the fact that it is, not easy to read this, as a woman, there's something difficult here. And as I said before, in chapter 2, it gets harder and harder, right? The husband whose wife is betraying him and not acknowledging everything he does for her gets very violent, at least in his, this is not Hosea here. It's a metaphor that God is talking about, but the punishment, it's harsh, and let me back up for a minute. The metaphor of human love being the power of human love being a metaphor for the love between God and human beings, it's powerful because it's so real to us. It's so, embodied to us. It's something we can so powerfully feel in our lives. But what happens is that when God talks about, when the metaphor has God, the man, the husband, just to give you an example, stripping her naked, leave her as on the day she was born, make her like a wilderness, let her die of thirst, disown her children, and on and on and on. I don't know. It's very hard. It's like, it's almost a, it's a narrative of, violence against a woman, sort of in a very, almost too matter of fact, maybe. Okay, let me hear you, Stephanie.
It's really Lauren, but okay.
Okay.
It's Lauren raising Stephanie's hand. We're together. Well, I was going to say two things. You kind of already said what I was going to say, but two things. The problem with the metaphor is not the love and the loyalty and the disloyalty part. That part makes perfect sense. The part that's difficult, especially teaching it, is, first of all, it only goes in one direction. In Judaism, that metaphor doesn't work if a man is disloyal to a woman. So that's difficult.
Exactly. Yeah,
and then,
exactly.
like you're saying, the reaction to it is so barbaric for us. It's abusive and barbaric for us to hear that that's the reaction to it. So
yes, and for, again, I'm saying, I think, because I'm like, in the end of the day, I feel like I'm a high school educator. Like, that's my reference point always. But my concerns for high school women are really the concerns for everybody. It should be hard for us to read that. It should be really painful. And I don't know what to, and you're right, it's the one direction of it. Here, let me just say, no, and the metaphor of human love, I think it's one of the most profoundly effective and magnificent ways of, ways that help us think about God. I think it's so powerful, it's exquisite. But here, Shir HaShirim, it actually goes in two directions. Remember, Shir HaShirim, like the uniqueness of Shir HaShirim is that it's a dialogue between a male and a female, a young man and a young woman. And you hear both of their voices talking about their love, talking about their yearning. But here, whether at a time when they're, where the relationship is loving, it's only, it seems, well, there's an implied, I don't know, let's continue talking about this. It's 3:06. I mean, I think it's something to think about. I don't know exactly what to think of it. I think to some degree we have to accept that, there are certain norms at certain times, that literature is, comes out of a certain historical context and a certain social context. Yeah, but it's definitely something to think about here, right? And so that's the final audience that, I'm thinking of, right? So next week we're going to talk about that central question that, we've brought up, is how was this Nivuah actually delivered? And, is it possible that God did tell the Navi, did actually give a Navi these very bizarre, almost, not almost immoral, there's conversation amongst the rabbis that try to show that it's halachically permissible, but it's certainly not ideal and maybe immoral directions for his own, about how to live his life. There's something very strange about that, and did it happen in reality? And if it did, and if it didn't, how was it delivered? What does it mean? And finally, the most important question: why is it so powerful, right? What is it? How does it work? And what does it say about nivuah, about prophecy in general. What does it say about, who a Navi is and what it means to be a prophet? So
Emily,
yes.
sorry, I know it's 3:06, but
No,
I just,
I'm here. Wait a minute. I'm here. I can hang in. I can hang out. I just don't, for whoever needs to leave, I want to let people go.
so I think like you were saying about Nevuah, I feel like this proves, or it only makes sense if we say that Nevuah has to be kind of streamed through the paradigm of the Navi. So what the way the Navi views the world, or the experiences that the Navi has in his real life, is going to frame and inform and shape the way the Nevuah comes out.
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah. The Navi himself is a Nevuah almost, right? But it's true. But on the other hand, we use the language today. That's a little bit too close to the language of being a role model. We say teachers should be role models. Teachers should teach by example. With the Navi, it's not exactly that always. But we have to, that's what we're going to try to get a sense of. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Anybody else? I'm so happy to see you all. That really, I just want to get a sense of who's here. And it's wonderful, really wonderful to see you. You all have my email or my phone number. If you have any comments or anything about next week, call me, let me know.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming,
Looking forward to
everybody.
next week.